access our report on our website, ENCATE.eu. So you can just find in the publication section and download it for free. So welcome everyone, and an honor to host our speakers and you in this room, in Zoom room, but also YouTube. It's a live stream event. ENCATE is a network. You might know 16 members, organizations from Europe are exchanging their practices in education against anti-Semitism, but also we try to bridge practice with theory and policy. We are a European-wide network, and we hope to continue our work in advocacy area as well as in exchange areas. As I said, it's live streamed on YouTube, so you can ask your questions on live chat. If you are in Zoom room, also you can use Zoom chat function, but we will also give the floor to participants to ask some video questions. So today we are having Zielińska as our moderator, also our partner organization Czulent. She's an advisor, activist from Jewish community in Poland. She fights anti-Semitism, worked for minority rights for years, and she's also a board member of Czulent. Czulent is also an ENCATE member and a partner of KIgA. My name is Emrah Gürsel. I'm from KIgA, Germany, and also I'm coordinating ENCATE together with my colleague 𝘗𝘢𝘯𝘦𝘭𝘪𝘴𝑗𝑒. And today as speakers, unfortunately, one of the speakers had to call off due to some personal reasons, but we have still two tremendous speakers. One of them is Makówka-Kwapisiewicz from Poland, Czulent. The other one is 𝘔𝘰𝘥𝘦𝘭𝘪𝘴𝑗𝑒 from Institute for Public Affairs from Slovakia. So I welcome them and thank you for their time and input. Today, without further ado, I just give the floor to my colleague, Zielińska, and thank you everyone for watching and supporting our endeavor.
Thank you very much, Emrah. Welcome everybody in the Zoom studio and on YouTube. I hope that we will have an interesting discussion and that we will touch on important subjects. Our two panelists, as Emrah mentioned, is Makówka-Kwapisiewicz and 𝘔𝘰𝘥𝘦𝘭𝘪𝘴𝑗𝑒. They are both scholars, activists, working with issues of anti-Semitism. And now we will be discussing or focusing our discussion based around the report that Anna is an author of, the mapping report about anti-Semitism in Visegrad countries, and also through the perspective of education. And I will start with Anna as an author of the report. Can you tell us a bit about the research that you conducted, the data that you've gathered, and also maybe something that was some finding that was most surprising to you, that was different from what you've expected, or new trends that you noticed in Holocaust education in anti-Semitism?
So thank you for the invitation. Thank you for having me. Like, it was a pleasure to work on the mapping report, and like Grigory helped me a lot, and also like he because of our conversation, which was like one of the first one, he just created like the path, like it was like very inspirational. So like I would say he's a co-author of the mapping report itself. So the idea of the mapping report itself was like to bring the good practices from the field, from the V4, because there's a lot of expertise and know-how and good practices, and people are not aware of. And also what is like very disturbing, that also our neighboring countries are not aware of what is going on in Poland, for example. And we have so much civil society groups working in that field, not only civil society groups like educational institutions, academia, museums, Jewish communities. And like I was very interesting how it is working. And being from the field, working in the field, I was hoping like to create like the roadmap for those organizations which will be willing to cooperate, and like to help them somehow to map those organizations which might be credible partner for them. Not like credible, knowing the field, but also like having the experience, which might be similar for in other counterparts in other countries. And also like to show the organization working in other countries, much more on Western side, to show that there's such a country like Slovakia, not Slovenia, as usually there's this understanding, and there's the Czech Republic or Hungary and Poland. So that was the main idea. And also like from the ENCATE network perspective, it was like very important and precious like to have those mapping report, like to find those organizations which or would be very good partner in the terms of cooperation and expand the network ENCATE itself. So that was a major goal. So it's supposed to be like 20 pages report. So in the end, we end up with 50 more and more pages. And I've decided, and we've decided that it has no sense like to create something new, but rather like to gather the good practices from the field, but also like to do the summary, what is working, what is not, and how it is implemented. And all those regulations, all those like recommendations from European bodies, how they are implemented by the countries, and how this kind of policy is influencing, and how the civil society groups are taking from it, and is it beneficial for them or not. So that is this kind of report. So showing like a little bit of historical background, because it's very important like to understand the situation, what the situation is, also like to tell the story about the Jewish community, but not like the history of the Jewish community, but about the numbers, what we are talking about, and how was the perspective of the genocide itself from those countries. And also I was happy that I managed to talk with fantastic experts from the field, and as I was saying, they shaped that report. And at the beginning, I was like hoping to have some kind of like data-driven report and a conversation-driven report, like quoting those experts. But sometimes because of the political turbulences, may I put it that way, it was easier for all of us, and we've decided later to not quote anyone, but rather like to give like the information in the report, like to not expose those who don't want to be exposed in such a report. So so that is like the general perspective, and we are sharing good practices from the field, which are very good in the regards of combating anti-Semitism and education. What was surprising for me, maybe not so surprising, but what is the common sense and the common trend, and maybe we can use the term of consensus between non-formal consensus between those far right and right agenda, that the anti-Semitism is not used as this old known anti-Semitism, but rather as a political tool to attack those liberal bodies and liberal parties and liberal actors, to destroy their credibility, like to create the perspective of this otherness, and to somehow stigmatize the person and stigmatize the human rights agenda. And that is very disturbing. And this, I found that what was missing, what is in the field, but which is missing in a general aspect, is this internal cooperation between those bodies, which are trying to combat anti-Semitism, which is also the cooperation from the local level, from the municipality and cities, might be much more fruitful in that regard, and we can expand that cooperation between those countries, and it will be very needed in that regard, because like it might be beneficial for all of the sides. So that was like that is for the beginning for myself. Thank you. I cannot hear you, Anna. Anečka, you need to turn on your microphone.
Turn on mic. Anna, mic.
Yes, I'm sorry. Please excuse me. I was in such a hurry to ask another question that I forgot to turn on my microphone. But I wanted Anna to ask a follow-up question to kind of see the whole picture of the report, or general view of what's in it. You started to mention the similarities, some patterns. You mentioned the right wing using anti-Semitism to present their anti-democratic and anti-multicultural agenda. Can you say more? Were there other similarities between the countries in trends, in terms of education, in terms of Holocaust denial, anti-Semitism?
So in the terms of Holocaust education, there is a Holocaust education, and there is no education about anti-Semitism itself. So anti-Semitism is rather something which is like added, I don't want to use the term value, but it's like something which is like part of the Holocaust education, if the teacher will be able like to implement the Holocaust education itself. So what was like very similar in those four countries, that there is a lack of respect towards teachers, that the teacher are not really like the profession itself has no value. So there is no credibility, and like they are overworked. And suddenly we as the civil society environment, we are trying like to encourage them to somehow involve them in this kind of additional activities, which for those people who are overworked, it's not necessarily something which they can just incorporate in their agenda, even though that is a part of the curriculum. If that is a part of the curriculum, it's fantastic, because then they can elaborate. But on the other hand, it's a question always of their background. If they have a good educational background, if they have this kind of additional exercises or additional workshops which those organizations are implementing. And usually, what is very similar also in those before countries, those additional activities usually are organized in the weekends. So if someone is overworked already, so having those 2 days, which they can just spend the time with their family or to rest, there's those kind of additional activities which they can just like go into those topics deeper. So like Hungary is trying like to encourage that school directors like to organize such activities as the something which is added to the school agenda. That those teachers are not necessarily losing or investing their free time, but it's like it's recognized by the schools. And also what was very interesting, that those additional activities which are run by those civil society groups, they are not necessarily counted as this certificated workshops or like trainings, which is what we might be the field for the improvement, and also some kind of advocacy work between those organizations. Also, what was very disturbing and interesting, which Grigory reflect on that during our conversation, that the attitudes of those teachers, like we are sending our kids to the schools, hoping that they would have the good educational perspective, and also working with those open-minded people. But on the other hand, they are like, according to different reports, and Slovakia was brave in that regard, because they measured the attitudes, and around 30 teachers are like rather supporting towards this far right agenda. And like in Poland, there's a lot of teachers, and and no one is even there to make such a investigation, put it that way. Like in Czech Republic, there was like similar analysis made among the students. And what was very interesting in that findings, that going to the memory places, going to those to the death camps or the museums, they are much more xenophobic towards Roma community, for example, because suddenly they are like understanding how such places could be used. which is like terrible. And what was like the, I can use the term joint statement from those teachers was saying that we need to reframe our agenda. We need to reframe our attitudes towards Holocaust and anti-Semitism education, that it needs to be wider and to be much more inclusive towards in other minorities, because like we cannot agree that the kids are like educated enough to be aware that it would be something for faux to say anti-Semitic, but on the other hand, at the same time, they can be very homophobic, right? And make very nasty statements, and no one would react on it. So that was the similarities, which are not really. Of course, there is a lot of goodwill in the field and like expertise of the teachers, and like they are doing a lot, but there's always that in other part and the perspective we need to be elaborate as well.
Thank you. I will maybe ask Grigory now, because you are you can tell us more about Slovakia in relation to what Anya said, to the similarities and certain trends. Can you say something more specific, or something that is different for Slovakia, or something that you would like to share in relation to what Anya mentioned?
Yes, thank you very much, Anna, for introducing me. First, thank you very much for invitation to take part in this event. Second, big congratulations to ENCATE for releasing this report. I was really happy to be one of the sources when I was interviewed by Anna. And really looking through this report, it's absolutely clear that now it's an indispensable part of the sources base for both scholars and practitioners. So really, congratulations. And third thing, just to mention, I don't want to present no results, no the project as such, but a couple of days ago, we with Tom Lantos Institute and Institute of Public Affairs, we released quite lengthy survey report about anti-Semitic prejudices. It's a result of the more than 2-year work supported by European Union, and this report really contains a lot of research data. So I don't want to speak now about this data, because it's really a huge report which is combining representative opinion poll on quite a lengthy sample of the population and then results of focus groups. Just to advise you, to recommend that if you will have interest and time to look through this report is available on our website and the website of Tom Lantos Institute. And now, just to your question, yes, there are some peculiarities in the situation with anti-Semitism in Slovakia, and definitely it affects first the policy recommendation which can be applied for, let's say, for practitioners, and second, of course, for the education. So for how to treat this issue in education system in schools, maybe in informal education. And of course, Slovakia has certain peculiarities. If you give me at least 10 minutes, I will try to describe the situation, the general discourse in Slovakia. And despite some commonalities, I think that maybe peculiarities are prevailing. Slovakia has very difficult, very hard history, very, I would say, controversial history with the destiny of Jewish population. Before the Second World War, Slovakia was a part of Czechoslovakia, was a land with flourishing Jewish cultural life, public life. After the Holocaust, in which more than 90% of the Jewish population were exterminated, Slovakia today, after 77 years after the Second World War, the Jewish population is insignificant. And we know from opinion poll that only few percent of the respondents in public opinion admit that they at least once met with Jewish persons. So Jewish community is almost invisible in Slovakia, but nevertheless, all three historic types of anti-Semitism is present here. Either old, this conspiratorial, then this secondary related to Holocaust distortion, and the new related to Zionism and Israel. And it's a, I would say, variety of factors. We can identify the positive elements in development and problematic or challenging elements in development. The positive elements in development is that Slovakia has absolutely clear anti-fascist state doctrine. So anti-Semitism is recognized as even something which should be penalized. Even, I mean, the radical forms of anti-Semitism penalized by the penal code. The current political elite is more or less free of expressions of anti-Semitism. Mainstream parties are openly condemning any expressions of racial hatred, anti-Semitism, and so on. But since 2016, and really it was the momentum in which society somehow realized that anti-Semitism is still a problem, even in the country literally almost without Jewish population or very small Jewish population. It was election in the parliament, openly anti-Semitic party. So it was shocking when in 2016, this neo-fascist People's Party, Our Slovakia, which de facto combines in its credo all types of anti-Semitism, old, secondary, and new, and they started to operate in the normal political and public life using finances from the state. And of course, it was a big challenge. The positive element of the whole agenda was that after this party was elected in the parliament, many groups of public population, people working in education, journalists, so I would say stakeholders, started to do something. And I think that the results of this are more or less okay. So, and partially the report describing, I mean, your report in which you described the situation in Slovakia just indicated this. Good practices, NGOs, advocates organizations, museums, schools, and so on. There are good examples how to treat with anti-Semitism, how to in targeted, very peculiar manner handle this issue in different environments. But of course, there are problems. The problems in education, specifically, if we are speaking about education, education as such is a big problem in Slovakia. Unfortunately, the prevailing trends in education are declining trends. It's a huge socio-political issue. And so this is the problem, but also the problem, the teaching itself and teachers themselves. So there are some examples in which the election of fascist party in parliament encouraged some teachers even either to be rejective to any proposals to improve education and history in order to fight against anti-Semitic and other racial prejudices, or these teachers are they are themselves, or they will themselves becoming the proponents of anti-Semitic views. So they are teaching using all these anti-Semitic prejudices in their schools. Then quite problematic, and I think it's commonality, problematic trend in public discourse and perception of reality. In Slovakia, especially, according to all opinion polls, this phenomenon is I would say, the most entrenched in Slovak society is a conspiratorial perception of reality. Slovakia is Central European champion in this. More than 50 in some questions, 60% of population convinced that conspiracies are behind of any political events in public life, international relations, and many of them are adherents of these traditional conspiracy, Jewish conspiracy theories, which is in the age of social networks and online communication became really quite explosive for spreading the anti-Semitic prejudices. But of course, again, there are some countering trends. There are good civic initiatives, either online or offline, many public intellectuals, good teachers, journalists are traveling around the country organizing public events with this topic. Jewish life, Holocaust, the modern expressions of racism. So Slovak society has certain part of its population which is mobilized in order to counter these trends. There are some positive moments in political life. I mentioned some of them. We have relatively good and well-developed legal base for prosecution of anti-Semitism. Then personal examples of politicians, our President Zuzana Čaputová, she is openly speaking about any occurrences of anti-Semitism, and if some incidents happen, then her voice is really very loud. Then 4 years ago, Slovak Parliament approved the International Holocaust Remembrance Association definition of anti-Semitism, which wasn't, I think, which is not usual thing for some countries, but in Slovakia somehow at that time the better part of political spectrum succeeded to do this. Then there are some symbolic events in which Slovak political class also is expressing its opinion, its views. For example, a couple of months ago, Slovak government apologized to Jewish population for approval of the so-called Jewish Code. It was the law which approved during the Slovak collaborationist state, which deprived of Jewish population of Slovakia from all human rights. Quite symptomatically, it was the biggest law approved in this period of time among all other regulations. So the Jewish Code was the biggest, the most lengthy legal regulation approved in this time, and Slovak government apologized for this now. The policy of remembrance, I think it's really very clear. So we cannot say that there are some problems. There are some problems in position of the governmental policy, regardless of the situation. As I said at the beginning, that Slovak past is really quite difficult for real reconciliation, because from one side it's a condemnation of the policies that time implemented by the racist regime against Jews, but at the same time, of course, to recognize that it wasn't only the policy of the government, but also the positions and attitudes of normal people, ordinary people. So the issue of bystandership and the issue of active involvement of the broader groups of the population. For example, the process of so-called Aryanization of the property. I know that in Poland, it's a bit different issue, because in Poland, the status of the entity wasn't like in Slovakia. Formally, it was an independent state, but we know that in Poland, the issue of restitution of property is also quite sensitive. But in Slovakia, it's taking into consideration these peculiarities is really a bit different. And then, and maybe now I'm just finishing, not to take much time, very positive elements in Christian-Jewish dialogue. So Slovak Catholic Church is criticized many times for its generally conservative attitude to many issues of reproductive behavior, so-called cultural ethical questions, LGBTI and so on. But one area exists in which really, even myself being quite liberal person, I cannot have any objections, because Catholic Church in Slovakia is very proactive in engagement of the dialogue between Christians, Catholic Christians and Jews, including open discussions about all these quite difficult issues. And I think that position of Catholic Church, which is quite opinion-making in Slovakia, the declared level of religiosity is quite high in Slovakia, contrary to, let's say, in Czech Republic. And I think that this is quite encouraging development in the last maybe 4 years. So now I'm finishing, but I'm ready to continue with your questions and the questions from the audience.
Thank you. We've got one question, which I think is kind of will be also a follow-up of what you've said, and also, so if you can answer the question, and then maybe Anna, you would like to add something. The question is: do civil society organizations face obstacles working at schools and with teachers? Do the governments thwart some of educational activities to fight anti-Semitism, LGBTQ issues, or other forms of hatred, and how?
If I can start, I don't think that there are really intentional obstacles for NGOs, human rights NGOs, advocacy, or I mean minority NGOs working with the topic of anti-Semitism and racism. I don't know the real situation with LGBTI. I think that in this area situation is more problematic and more difficult, but concerning this racism, anti-Semitism, and I mean similar agenda, I didn't hear about intentional obstacles, but of course there are some organizational difficulties, lack of sources maybe, but I didn't hear any negative information about intentional resistance, let's say, of the public organizations in the area of education. But of course, much depends on the teachers. And personally, myself, I know many teachers working around the country, which are very helpful. They are inviting people from NGOs. They are doing educational projects. They are doing any kinds of projects which are helping kids, people to understand what happened during the Second World War. So all these excursions to memorial sites, to museums, to the cemeteries, for example, to other places in which Jewish life was flourishing before the Second World War. And of course, meetings with the people, with Holocaust survivors. Only few people still live in Slovakia, but I think that comparing the situation, let's say 10 years ago, I think that today is better. And this, I would say, public, private or NGO partnership is today more important and more visible.
Thank you. Anna, if you would like to add something, as being from Poland, I know that the situation in Poland is a bit different, so it would be interesting to hear.
I would do the distinction between Slovakia and Czech Republic, and then Poland and Hungary. I would say they are like two paths, which not necessarily correlates. So in the terms of Slovakia and Czech Republic, I would say it's, as Grigory mentioned, it's rather similar. In the terms of Hungary and Poland, it's different. So we are facing politicization of the memory. So that is the biggest challenge, and how we are using that memory in the terms of our agenda, and also like using the term our agenda. There's the big distinction between those preferable civil society groups, which are like providing such a knowledge and their mission, and also those who are not, and they are exposed to somehow of difficulties in the terms of losing the funding, or not maybe like receiving the funding, or maybe like in the terms of funding the potential partners. Of course, in the terms of education in Poland, we are having voivodeships, which those voivodeships are having like people dealing with education. So it's always like individual people and their perception of this kind of cooperation. So they are like the cities which such education is like is the biggest value, and they are like giving and promoting such education. They are giving the special the funding to those teachers to attend such a trainings, and they are the teachers which are facing the problems to attend to such a trainings, because like the manager of the school is being afraid of being exposed, cooperating with a certain civil society groups which are exposed. And in that regard, like discrimination education was excluded from the curriculum. In 2015, before the 2015, the curriculum, there was like obligatory to mention about like the certain attitudes from the majority of the population, like the ethnical Poles towards Jews during the Holocaust and their actions. Right now, it's not. So right now, it's only obligatory to mention about those Poles saving Jews during the Holocaust. And on the terms of formal procedures, like everything is fantastic. So there is the Holocaust education, there is the information about the anti-Semitism, there is an increased cooperation between Yad Vashem and Poland. They are like those bilateral agreements. Teachers are going to the schools, to the Yad Vashem to being trained. But on the other hand, they are trained before they are going to Israel on the certain agenda. So we are losing this concept, and the same goes with Hungary. So like there is a curriculum, there is a lots of willingness of combating anti-Semitism about the education, but the question is like who is verifying, like who is trying to verify those textbooks and the curriculum? Like, is that feedback from those experts is incorporated in the agenda or maybe not? So they are the questions which are like, we can just leave it open and we can just elaborate on it later. But for sure, what is needed here, it's this kind of leaving the memory. But like memory was always politicized. For me as historians, it was from the ancient times. Like having the power means that you're shifting the history like in terms of your agenda. So the question is how you wanted to prevail those such a memories and to have open society and with the kids who are able like to have this kind of aspects of critical thinking. So that is a major goal. It should be the major goal of the education.
Thank you. We have another question from the audience. How can the report help strengthening combating anti-Semitism in your countries or in other countries of the?
If I can start, I think that the documents of this type, I mean, research report or I mean, report about the situation. I mean, what is helping to understand better the issue. And I think that this report is really helping to understand better the issue. So describing the state of affair, and specifically in case of this report, it presents good practices which can be replicated. It can be inspiration. So it means that the spreading of good practices is very important. And in Slovakia, for example, I mean, all these good practices, and by the way, I forgot about one good practice concerning good partnership between the public administration and civil society. That Ministry of Justice introduced several years ago the special grant scheme for NGOs dealing with the issues of human rights, social advocacy, fight against racism, anti-Semitism, and any other forms of racial discrimination. And every year they're announcing the round of the grant, and the commission composed by impartial, independent scholars are deciding about granting the money. And I think it's very important, very helpful. But just I mean, back to the question. Slovakia is a relatively small country, but there are some places in which people with a high ethos of solving the issues, sometimes they feel themselves alone. So smaller groups in remote areas. And for such people, I think this kind of documents, these reports can be very helpful. So first, they can get more information, and then they can have the source of inspiration, maybe transformed, modified into local conditions.
Thank you. And Anna, if you would like to add something, and also because that's what I also wanted to ask about. Grigori already started answering this on top of answering the question about report helping to combat anti-Semitism. If you could name one good practice that you think should be replicated in other V4 countries, or even should be replicated in Europe in general.
So, and maybe I will connect it with a question from our chat about the Jewish communities, if they are involved. Jewish communities are taking active part in the decision-making process, and also in the terms of creating such a curriculum. Of course, it differs in each country. And also, Jewish community differs and their expertise. So, like, it's very important, like, to have. It's also the question of this kind of politicizing of this agenda. Like, it would be fantastic to have credible experts from the Jewish community. What I mean, credible experts, are those who are scholars and they are like having different opinions towards history, and having their voice like to be heard. It would be the biggest value. In the terms of good practices, I would say, like, I love coalitions, and the coalition implemented by the Hungarian organizations, and what they are doing this iWalks, bringing the memory, trying like to somehow exchange with the places which are not necessarily known from this different perspective, from this kind of multicultural background or those kind of aspects. But also what I liked was this kind of political agenda program that after the elections in Slovakia, there was the program when suddenly the group of activists decided to visit those cities which were very problematic, and they were like having the biggest support of the 𝘗𝘢𝘏 party, and they were organizing different kind of events without this judgment approach. They went there like to discuss, to ask them like what is going on, and to start to talk about the democracy, what the democracy is for them, what does it mean for them. So I love this kind of program when like you're like interacting and not like going there with a certain agenda, telling those people and organization right now we will show you the path how it needs to be organized, but rather like this kind of a cooperation involvement. Yes, that is what I like.
Thank you. I will ask another question. There are lots of very good questions here, but you both mentioned a wider perspective of education on against racism in general, and like talking with people from places who voted right wing and are not tolerant toward minorities. There is a question about the link between anti-Semitism and anti-Gypsyism. Is the Holocaust anti-Semitism education, if done, ever linked to the broader picture of anti-racism in any of these countries? Are there any good practices in this regard? So if whoever wants to answer, please.
Well, I will try. Well, of course, we know from public opinion polls that this phenomenon, I mean, the phenomenon of racial hatred toward Jews and toward Roma, of course, they are interlinked. We know that in the same groups, we can find people with anti-Jewish prejudices and anti-Roma racist prejudices. I think it's clear. The problem with prejudice against Roma is that first, these prejudices are very highly spread in the population. So much higher than anti-Jewish prejudices. So according to opinion poll surveying so-called Bogardus scale, so it means that unwillingness to have neighbors Jews or other groups and Roma. So 30%, I think 30% of the respondents were against the neighborhood with Jewish, but 70 and something, so 3 times more, 2.5 and 3 times more, wouldn't like to have Romas as a neighbor. So it means that the spread of this anti-Roma racism is quite visible, and it's not only about the historic past. So if you are speaking with a person with anti-Roma prejudices, then these historic events in absolutely on the, I mean, it's almost not appearing. And I think it's very important to aware people that not only anti-Jewish Holocaust happened in this country, but also anti-Roma. But at the same time, to fight against anti-Roma racism, I think it needs more means, maybe different arguments, and first of all, the real solution of the quite unfavorable social situation of Roma. That's why, of course, I know that there are some projects in which experts, scholars, activists are teaching local people about what happened to a big part of the Roma population during the Second World War. But it should be, I think, it should be combined with other educational activities, which maybe are not very typical for activities in the area of anti-Semitism. It's very specific, and this kind of projects, including involvement of Roma people themselves to these activities, I think that.
Oh, I think we lost Grigory. So maybe until Grigory unfreezes, I will add quickly something, because the Jewish Association. Oh, here you are.
Yeah, I have unstable connection. I mean,
yes, you
indicating still that you have unstable connection. I don't know why. Maybe I'm not very stable.
But would you like to add something more, or did you answer the? Did you finish answering the question, or would you like to add something more?
No, I just what I wanted to say that, I mean, yes, this interlinkage in perception of people of terrible things which happened to Jews and to Roma during the Holocaust, it's obvious, but at the same time, the specificity of the so-called, I mean, the specificity of social situation of Roma and a bit different sources of anti-Roma racism. It needs to combine the historic education about past, but also some other efforts, some other projects dealing with the unfavorable situation of Roma people in Slovakia.
Thank you. Anna, would you like to say something?
Yes, in the terms of Roma memory and the Roma genocide itself, like I totally agree with Grigory, and also like what was very interesting that the teachers are applying for such a trainings or additional activities, like to learn how to cope with the Roma hatred or hatred against Roma, because they don't know how to deal with it, and they don't know how to talk with kids. So they are using anti-Semitism education, like to deal with such a situation. So it's creating like the possibilities to connect it. And also what was very disturbing, like the fact that the kids and the teachers and also like the general population are like tired of the Holocaust education, which is very, very, very disturbing. So, and also one of the experts was saying that it would be fantastic, like if we can just like face the new realities. So maybe how to like expand the education, or maybe like to involve in other groups, like to show the mechanism of the stigmatization, of the discrimination, with all this kind of distinction towards certain groups and like their living condition and the situation, and also the attitudes among from the society, but like to be much more like nowadays, like to as the Tall Stories That Move is, which was created by the Anna Frank House, which I was happy to be a part of the team, that like we are using the Holocaust and anti-Semitism as a basis, But on the other hand, we are using the testimony of the nowadays people living in like the kids or teenagers, which are like experiencing similar situation, and suddenly that those kids can create like some kind of empathy. Because you can be discriminated against because you're Roma, you can be discriminated against because you're wearing glasses, or having like be shaped differently, or like not to be in line with the beauty standards. So there are different kinds of like discrimination which are affecting us. But of course, on top of it, there is this racial discrimination, which like decision makers cannot cope with it, because it needs to be like ongoing cooperation between different bodies, experts, and those policymakers.
But
if I can
yes,
just something. Yeah, I think it's very important what Anna said, that if speaking about fight against anti-Semitism, and especially this historic aspect, that it really can be focused on the past, but speaking about Roma, improvement of Roma situation and improving the awareness of the population about Roma, I think it should be focused more on the current state, and I think that all these issues of liberal democratic regime, human rights, uniqueness of each personality, universal value of equality and freedom, I think it should be part of the education for all people. For each person. And in case of Roma, I think it's very important, because this very toxic generalization concerning different groups of population, I think that these toxic generalization are targeting especially Roma. So it's a challenge for those people, for practitioners who are working in the terrain with the local people, civic activists, NGOs, that they should stress on this. So we are speaking about Roma problems, but we are speaking about them, these people, as a unique persons, as persons who deserve the same treatment, that equality is absolutely axiomatic, and so on. It's very important. This so-called mainstream human rights discourse should be somehow presented in all these activities.
Thank you. I think you touched on an important subject of enlarging the scope of education, or adding more topics into the education about Holocaust, even, because adding something that children can relate to and they can identify with, and showing problems and showing history from the perspective that they can understand it. I think it's very important. But also, and here I will refer to other question that we received. You mentioned that we should enlarge the scope of the education to include specificity of the Roma population, of Roma and Roma persecution and genocide. But do you also see a potential to increase educational programs that are tackling other, not only Holocaust? The report focuses mainly on the Holocaust, but also anti-Semitic conspiracy theories, online hate.
So there are initiatives like that. And they are like created within a cooperation with the authorities, with the cities, like AGC right now in Czech Republic is and Jewish community. They are changing curriculums, textbooks, like to add such issues, because it's a huge problem, right? Like right now, the hatred is going to this online environment. So it's very challenging, because like those kids which were exposed to violence, it was like 8 hours. Right now it's 24/7, because they are all the time online. So like how we can protect them, how we can protect those people. And also, like according to the research of 𝘞𝘠𝘭𝘫, those who are exposed to this online hatred, they are much more willing to accept physical aggression. towards those groups. And it's not only about like those communities which we are talking about, like Roma community and Jewish community, but like LGBT plus community, right? It's like homophobia, it's such a level of homophobia and it's still increasing. So we need to find a solution, like the very creative solution, like what to do. Like, is it like to ban it, or like how we are coping with it? So it would be fantastic to have such a cross-border, interfaith, inter-ethnic cooperation between different partners, like to really find the consensus, what to do and how we can just fight with it, right?
There is another relevant question, I think, has been asked, and it relates to what you were talking about. If we're talking about the cooperation, even among all the countries in the region, if we're talking about taking into consideration Roma community perspective, how do you see that opinions or requests or goals of the Jewish community, of a Roma community, taken into account in the design of the curricula and in training educators? If they're setting policies, are the minorities consulted, or their opinions are ignored?
Well, interesting question. Really, I'm not expert on this particular issue. I know that, of course, there are some mechanisms, even formal mechanisms of consultancy of the state with the representatives of ethnic minorities. For example, we have the special council of the government for ethnic minorities. So representatives of all these minorities are in this council. They are presenting their views. I think that they do not have, of course, the competencies to decide, but they have the right to advise. I don't know specifically how their voices are accepted or incorporated into education policies. I am maybe rather skeptical. But symptomatic thing is, again, that I didn't hear about some conflicts about this. But again, I mean, some communities are very tiny. Some communities, maybe they have less opportunities to influence something. For example, Jewish community is very tiny, but maybe concerning their voice, this voice probably is heard more frequently. We are listening these voices frequently. Roma community is higher numerically, but I think that, and the voice of Roma community is also listened maybe, but if some events happened, it's less about education, it's more about, let's say, rejection of bad practices, rejection of anti-Gypsyism, and Hungarian community is the biggest, and I think that the more profiled. I mean, so it means that I think it's a situation in which personally myself, I do not have knowledge how opinion of these people representing ethnic communities, minorities, how this voice is somehow accepted in the education system. But I hope that it's happening. I hope this is happening. This inclusive approach is today maybe more frequently used than, let's say, 10, 15 years ago. Now we have government which is with all objections against some of the members of this government, but trying to be in compliance with universal values. So I hope the situation will be improving.
Anna, would you like to say a few words?
Yes, maybe one sentence because it's 5 already. So It differs. So like in Czech Republic, there is a cooperation and they are like, and in Slovakia as well, but like it's rather in the non-formal education section, I would say, not in the terms of formal education, because there is a group of experts who are creating those manuals and they are creating like the curriculum itself. So it's not working like that, that suddenly like the Ministry of Education is asking for the approval, or rather is organizing. It's, as Grigory was saying, it was like on the advisory aspect. So they are like the non-formal groups or like the advisory bodies which are giving their feedback or the expertise. In Hungary, it was much more developed, but like in the other hand, like there is no visible report showing how this kind of feedback is incorporated in such textbooks or curriculum in the terms of Poland. So like there is a special community, which is the Joint Commission of the Government and Minorities, but they are dealing with the policies, not the education per se, because the Ministry of Education is showing that it's like those people who are creating textbooks and curriculums, and they are the experts which are approving those textbooks, because they need to be approved by the Ministry of Education. So the procedures look like that they are applying and they are accepted as such as experts. They need to have that references at least two of the organizations. So right now it's much more like those people dealing with the Christianity or like with the different aspects of the education, and not necessarily with the anti-discrimination per se. And then it's a very transparent process in that regard that you can apply. But unfortunately, there is no like the round table of those Jewish organizations which are going through the curriculum or through those textbooks, looking for and verifying if they are having this kind of stereotypes, prejudices inside, etc. Well, like working with the on the program called Antisemitism is Not an Opinion, we've verified those books, and like the majority of the content was having this kind of anti-Semitic echoes inside, showing that Jews were guilty of the Holocaust and there is some kind of punishment, and that was the assumption that like and a lot of different stereotypes which were like there, and that it's still there, right?
Yes.
So
thank you.
yes.
I don't think we have any more questions. I had some more prepared, but you answered them also, because I wanted to ask you if there is a need for cooperation, what can be done, what actions can be taken to support development of Holocaust education and education on addressing anti-Semitism in the V4 countries. So I think that this is very important, that such initiatives should take place, and they should be pursued. And I wanted to thank you very much for participating in our panel. If you would like to say something as a closing remarks, please do. If not, we will be finishing the presentation.
Just a couple of words. I think that when we are implementing such projects, either what Anna with her colleagues did, or for example, we with Tom Lantos Institute, these projects are creating excellent space for cooperation. So when we were, let's say, seeking for experts for our workshops, really we found quite good spectrum of experts, and Anna was among our experts. And so then today I am somehow returning this opportunity. So I think that the higher number of such projects, the best options for exchange of opinions, exchange of data, exchange of experience, and continuation of good practices, so replication, multiplication of the practices. So again, I would like to congratulate for this excellent report, which is now living by its life. And I hope that our fruitful cooperation, maybe partnership, will be continued.
Yes, me as well. Like I really believe in cooperation and coalitions. And the last question was about like the curriculum and cooperation. It would be fantastic to have such a cross-border cooperation between different groups, like very different groups. And as Grzegorz is saying that they publish their reports, like it's so good work that it's like it would be some kind of like sin like to not analyze that and like to not to share. So and there's a lack of knowledge in the field that people are not aware that such a good initiatives were implemented. So I'm hoping that like the second step and the stage of the program would be like in-person meeting of all of those experts from those V4 countries, and not only like to share such a good experience and knowledge. So let's hope.
I think this is something. This is maybe something for ENCATE to think of. It's a coalition of social organizations that are working on education on Holocaust. I see a comment from ENCATE that definitely they will look into it. So I wanted to thank you once more to our panelists. Thank you very much. To those who joined us on Zoom, who watched the panel on YouTube, and please read the reports, use them, and if you have any questions or comments, you can contact us via ENCATE webpage or social media. Thank you so much. Have a good evening, everybody.